Welcome to HOA Justice Stories. She treated a fence panel like a felony. I held up my permit paperwork and Karen yelled that my paperwork did not count because she did not like the date. "I will not be disrespected," she screamed, jabbing her finger at the packet in my hands like it was a weapon I had pulled on her. Her scarf whipped sideways in the evening wind and I could see the fury twisting her face into something ugly and raw. Behind me, the contractor stood frozen next to his truck, one hand still gripping a fence post he had been about to set into the fresh hole we had dug that afternoon. The permit was legitimate, stamped by the city 2 weeks ago, submitted to the HOA Architectural Committee exactly 14 days before we broke ground, which was the timeline spelled out in the Riverbend Homeowners Association bylaws. Evelyn White, board secretary and self-appointed gatekeeper of every single decision that touched this subdivision in Grand Rapids, Michigan, did not care about any of that. She snatched the permit out of my hands before I could react and flipped through it like she was looking for a typo to weaponize. Her eyes scanned every line and I watched her lips move as she read, her jaw clenching tighter with each page. "The date you submitted this is irrelevant, because the committee did not convene to review it," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. I froze. That was a lie. The committee met every Tuesday and my submission had landed in their inbox on a Monday. I work remote as a software developer, on video calls all day, and I had checked the HOA portal obsessively to make sure the packet uploaded correctly. It had. The confirmation email was still in my phone. "This is not valid," Evelyn continued, tapping the cover page with one manicured nail. "You can stop work immediately or I will authorize enforcement action tonight." The contractor stepped forward, his tool bag clinking against his hip. "Ma'am, he has a city permit and the HOA acknowledgement," he said, his tone patient but firm. I watched Evelyn turn toward him slowly, her expression shifting from rage to cold calculation. "Keep talking, I love adding notes," she said, pulling a small notebook from her blazer pocket and scribbling something down without breaking eye contact. The contractor looked at me and I gave him a tiny shake of my head. I knew what she was doing. She was building a file, manufacturing a paper trail that would justify whatever punishment she had already decided to deliver. "I need to see the committee meeting minutes," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "If they did not review my submission, I want the record that shows why." Evelyn smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made my stomach drop. "Those are internal documents, and I am not required to share them with you," she said. "The board will back me because they are afraid of me." She said it out loud, no hesitation, no shame, like it was a fact she was proud of. I felt my hands ball into fists, and I forced them to relax. I was rebuilding my finances after a bad year, and I could not absorb bogus fees or legal costs over a fence that I had every right to install. The contractor cleared his throat and addressed me directly. "Do you want me to keep going, or do you want me to pull the post and come back another day?" I looked at the hole we had already dug, the perfectly measured setback from the property line, the survey stakes I had paid for out of pocket because I knew Evelyn would try to claim I was encroaching. I had done everything right. If I stopped now, she would interpret it as surrender and the fines would come anyway. If I kept going, she would escalate immediately. Either way, I was in her crosshairs. "Keep going," I said. "We are doing this by the book, and if she wants to fight it, she can bring the receipts." Evelyn's smile vanished. "Fine," she said, turning on her heel and walking toward the street where her car was parked. "You just made this so much worse for yourself." She climbed into her sedan and I watched her pull out her phone, typing furiously. Within 30 seconds, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA management company with a subject line that read "Violation Notice, Immediate Action Required." I opened it and felt my chest tighten. The notice claimed I had failed to submit a permit application, that I was in violation of Section 4.7 regarding unapproved exterior modifications, and that I owed an immediate fine of $500, with an additional $250 per day until the violation was corrected. I read it twice, my pulse hammering in my ears. The notice was dated today, but the language implied I had never submitted anything. It was gaslighting in official letterhead form. I forwarded the email to the contractor, and he looked up from his phone with a grim expression. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You have the acknowledgement." "I know," I said, scrolling through my inbox to find the original confirmation. When I pulled it up, my stomach dropped again. The acknowledgement email had come from an automated system, not from a human committee member, and it only confirmed receipt, not approval. Evelyn had found her loophole. "The board hearing is scheduled for today," the notice continued, "and if I missed it, they plan to default vote against me." I checked my watch. It was 6:45 in the evening. The hearing was at 7. I had 15 minutes to get to the community center across the subdivision, and I still had dirt on my hands and boots. "Do what you can in the next 10 minutes, I told the contractor. "I have to go fight this in person." He nodded and grabbed the post. "I will get this one set, and then I am packing up until you tell me it is clear," he said. "I appreciate that," I said, already jogging toward my front door to grab my keys and the printed permit packet I had kept in a folder on my kitchen counter. I made it to the community center with 3 minutes to spare, my heart still racing from the sprint across the parking lot. The meeting room was set up like a courtroom, with a long table at the front where the board members sat and a single chair facing them in the center of the room. Evelyn was already seated at the far end of the table, her notebook open in front of her, her pen poised like a weapon. The HOA president, a retired accountant named Greg, sat in the middle, flanked by 2 other board members I recognized but had never spoken to. There were maybe a dozen other homeowners scattered in the chairs behind me, most of them looking bored or annoyed. Greg called the meeting to order and immediately turned to my case. "We have a violation report submitted by Secretary White regarding unapproved fence installation at your address," he said, reading from a printed sheet. "Do you have anything to say before we vote?" I stood up, holding my permit packet. "I submitted my application 14 days before starting work, exactly as required by the bylaws," I said. "I have the city permit, the HOA acknowledgement email, and the survey showing my fence is within the setback." Evelyn leaned forward. "The committee did not approve your design," she said. "You were required to wait for written approval, and you did not receive it." I pulled out my phone and opened the email thread. "The acknowledgement says the committee reviews submissions within 10 business days and that silence constitutes approval if no objections are raised," I said. "It has been 14 days and I received no objections." Greg looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Evelyn and she shook her head slightly. "That policy was updated last month," she said smoothly. "You were required to confirm approval in writing." I felt my jaw clench. There was no updated policy posted on the HOA portal, and I checked it yesterday. Evelyn pulled a printed memo from her folder and slid it across the table toward Greg. "This was emailed to all residents on the 15th of last month," she said. "I never received that email," I said. "Can you show me the distribution list?" Evelyn's smile returned. "That is an internal record and I am not required to share it," she said. The same line she had used an hour ago in my yard. I saw one of the other board members, a woman named Linda, shift in her seat and frown. She looked at Evelyn and then at me. "Did you send that memo to everyone or just to the committee?" Linda asked. Evelyn's smile tightened. "It was sent to all residents via the portal notification system," she said. I pulled up the HOA portal on my phone right there and navigated to the notifications archive. The last update I had received was 3 months ago about pool maintenance. There was no memo about fence approval policy. I turned my phone around and showed the screen to Greg. "This is my notification history," I said. "There is nothing from last month." Greg looked at Evelyn and she did not blink. "The portal has been experiencing technical issues," she said. "That is not my responsibility." Linda spoke up again. "If the portal is broken, how are residents supposed to know about policy changes?" Evelyn's expression hardened. "Residents are responsible for staying informed," she said. "Ignorance is not an excuse." I could see Greg weighing his options. He did not want to contradict Evelyn, but he also did not want to look unreasonable in front of a room full of homeowners. I decided to push. "I am requesting a copy of the memo, the email distribution log, and the committee meeting minutes for the past month," I said. "If this policy exists, it should be easy to produce." Evelyn closed her notebook. "This hearing is not a discovery process," she said. "You violated the rules and the board will vote accordingly. Keep talking, I love adding notes," she added, her tone mocking. I felt the room shift. A couple of the residents behind me exchanged glances and one of them pulled out their phone and started typing. Greg cleared his throat. "We will take a 5-minute recess and reconvene to vote," he said. I walked out into the hallway, my hands shaking with frustration and adrenaline. The contractor called me while I was pacing outside. "The post is set," he said. "But I just got a call from the HOA management company telling me to cease work immediately, or they will authorize a tow on my truck." I felt my blood pressure spike. "They cannot tow your truck from my property," I said. "It is private property and you are here with my permission." He sighed. "I know, but I do not need the headache, man. If they call a tow company, I have to deal with it even if it gets sorted out later. I will come back when this is resolved." I understood. He was a small contractor and he could not afford to get tangled in HOA drama that might cost him time and money. I hung up and stared at my phone. My battery was at 15%. I had been recording the interaction with Evelyn earlier using a voice memo app, and I had left it running during the hearing, but the constant recording was draining my battery fast. I needed to keep the phone alive long enough to capture the vote and whatever happened next. I turned off every app except the recorder and slipped the phone back into my pocket. When the meeting reconvened, Greg announced that the board had voted to uphold the violation and that I owed the $500 fine plus $250 per day until the fence was removed or properly approved. I stood up immediately. "I am appealing this decision, and I am requesting a formal review by the management company," I said. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed. "You can appeal all you want," she said. "The fine stands and the daily penalties start tomorrow." I walked out of the meeting room and drove home in silence, my mind racing through every possible next move. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw the contractor's truck was gone, and the single fence post stood alone in the yard like a monument to failure. I went inside, plugged in my phone, and opened my laptop. I had one card left to play, and I had been holding it because I wanted Evelyn to escalate far enough that the blowback would be catastrophic. The card was an email thread I had discovered 2 weeks ago, while digging through old HOA records that had been accidentally CC'd to me during a billing dispute last year. The email was from the HOA attorney to the board, dated 6 months ago, and it was a warning. The attorney had explicitly told the board to stop using architectural committee approvals as a revenue mechanism and to stop backdating violation notices to manufacture late fees. The email cited specific examples, including one case where Evelyn had altered submission timestamps in the portal to make it look like a homeowner had missed a deadline. The attorney had warned that if the practice continued, the HOA could face serious legal consequences, including dissolution of the board and personal liability for board members. I had kept the email quiet because I wanted to see if the behavior would stop. It had not. Evelyn had doubled down, and now I had proof that she had been explicitly warned and had ignored it. I let her threaten a lien, because that threat would look terrible on the record. I wanted her to go as far as she could before I dropped the hammer. The next morning I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was a notice of intent to file a lien against my property if the fine and daily penalties were not paid within 10 days. The letter also included a separate notice stating that the HOA had filed a small claims case against me to recover the penalties and legal fees. The case was scheduled for a hearing in 3 weeks. Evelyn was escalating exactly as I had expected, and she was doing it in writing, which made everything worse for her and better for me. I called the HOA attorney's office and asked to speak to him directly. The receptionist put me through after I explained that I had a question about board conduct. The attorney, a calm-voiced man named Richard, listened while I summarized the situation. When I mentioned the fence approval timeline and the violation notice, he sighed. "Let me pull your file," he said. There was a long pause and I heard him typing. "Okay, I see the notice," he said. "This does not match the timeline you are describing. When did you submit your application?" I gave him the exact date and the acknowledgement email timestamp. He was quiet for a moment. "That should have been automatically approved," he said. "Who issued the violation?" "Evelyn White," I said. He sighed again, and this time it sounded like frustration. "I am going to need to review this with the board," he said. "In the meantime, do not pay the fine. I am putting a hold on the lien filing." I felt a small surge of relief, but I knew it was not over. Evelyn would not back down just because the attorney told her to. She had ignored him before. 2 days later, I was standing in my yard when a tow truck pulled up in front of my house. The driver got out and walked toward me holding a clipboard. "I have an authorization to tow a contractor vehicle from this address," he said. "There is no contractor vehicle here," I said. He looked around, clearly confused. "The work order says there is a truck blocking HOA access," he said. I shook my head. There is no truck, and there is no blocked access. Somebody called this in as harassment. The driver looked at his clipboard again and then at me. He pulled out a magnetic placard from his pocket and flashed it toward me. "This is a tow authorization from the HOA," he said, "but I am not towing anything if there is no vehicle." He walked back to his truck and made a phone call. A minute later, he waved at me and drove off. I called the contractor and told him what had happened. "That is insane," he said. "They tried to tow a truck that was not even there?" I told him I would let him know when it was safe to come back. He agreed, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. He was done with this project unless I could guarantee no more interference. That afternoon, my security camera caught something that changed everything. The camera, which I had installed on my front porch to monitor the yard during construction, recorded Evelyn walking up to the survey stakes at 11 at night. She stood there for a solid minute, looking around, and then she pulled up one of the stakes and moved it about 6 inches closer to the property line. She did not see the camera. I watched the footage 3 times, my heart pounding, before I saved it to 3 different cloud accounts and a USB drive. The next day, Evelyn sent me an email claiming that my fence installation was encroaching on the HOA common area and that I needed to move the entire fence line back by 12 inches. She attached a reference to the original subdivision plat and claimed that my survey was incorrect. I knew it was not. My surveyor had used the county records and had certified the line, but now I had proof that Evelyn had tampered with the stakes, which meant she was manufacturing the encroachment claim. I replied to her email with a single line. "I have video evidence that the survey stakes were tampered with, and I will be providing it to the board and the county if this escalation continues." I did not mention her specifically. I wanted to see if she would incriminate herself further. Her response came within 10 minutes. "Your camera is a privacy violation, and I will be filing a complaint with the board," she wrote. I smiled. She had just confirmed she knew about the camera, which meant she knew she had been recorded. I forwarded the entire email chain along with the video file to the HOA attorney. I also sent a copy to the management company with a request for an emergency board meeting. Richard, the attorney, called me within an hour. "We need to talk," he said. "I am going to recommend that the board reverse the violation and refund any fines. This has gone too far. I appreciated the sentiment, but I knew Evelyn would not go quietly." The emergency meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. In the meantime, I received another threatening letter from Evelyn, this time claiming that I had failed to respond to the violation notice and that the daily penalties had now reached $2,000. She also included a notice that the HOA was proceeding with the small claims filing and that I needed to appear in court. The court date was set for 10 days out. I spent the weekend preparing. I printed every email, every notice, every acknowledgement, and every piece of correspondence I had received from the HOA. I organized it into a timeline and highlighted every inconsistency, every backdated notice, and every contradictory statement Evelyn had made. I also pulled the attorney's warning email from 6 months ago and added it to the packet. I printed 15 copies, one for each board member, one for the attorney, one for the management company, and several extras for any homeowners who wanted to see what was happening. On Monday, I arrived at the community center 30 minutes early. The parking lot was already half full, which surprised me. I walked into the meeting room and saw at least 30 homeowners in the chairs, far more than the usual handful. Word had spread. People were angry. I recognized a few faces from my street and a couple of others who had been on the receiving end of Evelyn's enforcement campaigns in the past. Greg called the meeting to order and immediately addressed the elephant in the room. "We are here to discuss the violation case involving the fence installation and some concerns that have been raised about board conduct," he said. He looked uncomfortable, his hands fidgeting with a pen. Richard, the attorney, was seated to his right, and he looked grim. Evelyn was at the far end of the table, her notebook open, her expression unreadable. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. "I have prepared a packet of evidence that I would like to submit for the record," I said. I handed copies to each board member, to Richard, and to the management company representative. I also placed a stack on the table near the door for anyone else who wanted one. The homeowners in the back immediately grabbed copies and started flipping through them. Richard opened the packet and started reading immediately. His expression darkened as he turned the pages. Greg looked over his shoulder and I saw his face go pale. Evelyn did not move. She sat perfectly still, her pen frozen above her notebook. I submit the packet to the HOA attorney and watched the tone change instantly. Richard closed the packet and set it down carefully. He looked at Evelyn and then at Greg. "We need to recess this meeting and convene an executive session," he said. "This contains allegations of misconduct that require immediate board review." Greg nodded quickly. "We are recessing for 15 minutes, he announced. The board members stood and filed out of the room into a side office. The homeowners behind me erupted into conversation. I heard fragments of questions and outrage. Someone asked me if they could take a photo of the packet and I said yes. Within minutes, people were texting and emailing copies to neighbors who were not there. If you are enjoying this story, smash that like button and subscribe, because there is so much more chaos coming. 15 minutes turned into 45. When the board finally returned, Richard was the one who spoke. After reviewing the evidence provided, the board is immediately reversing the violation, refunding all fines and penalties, and placing a hold on the small claims filing pending further investigation, he said. Additionally, the board is commissioning an independent audit of all architectural committee decisions from the past 12 months to ensure compliance with governing documents and state law. Evelyn stood up abruptly. "This is absurd," she said. "You are allowing one disgruntled homeowner to derail the entire enforcement process." Richard turned to her and his voice was ice. "Miss White, the evidence shows that violation notices were backdated, that survey markers were tampered with, and that you were explicitly warned 6 months ago to stop these practices," he said. "The board is lucky this has not already resulted in a lawsuit. You need to sit down." The room went silent. Evelyn's face turned red, and for a moment I thought she was going to start yelling. But instead she grabbed her notebook and walked out of the meeting. The door slammed behind her, and the room stayed quiet for a long beat. Greg cleared his throat. "The board will be scheduling a vote to remove Miss White from her position as secretary," he said. "In the meantime, all architectural committee decisions will be reviewed by the management company and myself directly." The meeting is adjourned. The homeowners clapped. It was not loud or sustained, but it was genuine. I walked out into the parking lot and called the contractor. "You are clear to finish the job," I said. "The HOA just reversed everything and Evelyn is done." He laughed. "I will be there tomorrow morning," he said. The fence was finished 3 days later. It was exactly where it was supposed to be, exactly the height and style that the city permit and the original HOA bylaws allowed, and it looked great. The contractor even added a small gate at my request, just to make access easier. On the day he finished, a surveyor truck pulled up, and the surveyor got out with his equipment. I had requested an official resurvey just to close the loop and make sure there was no ambiguity left for anyone to exploit. The surveyor set up his transit and took measurements for about an hour. When he was done, he walked over and handed me a signed certificate. "Your fence is 4 inches inside your property line," he said. "You have plenty of clearance." I thanked him and filed the certificate with the county and the HOA management company. That same afternoon, I received an email from Richard. The audit had uncovered widespread issues with backdating and selective enforcement. The board had voted to remove Evelyn from her position and to adopt new transparency policies for all committee decisions. The email also included a settlement offer. The HOA would refund all fines and penalties I had paid, cover my surveyor costs, and agree to limits on enforcement discretion going forward. I accepted the settlement. 2 weeks later, I received a check for $1,800, which covered the surveyor, the legal consult I had paid for early in the process, and the original $500 fine that had started the whole mess. The small claims case was dismissed with prejudice, meaning the HOA could not refile it. The tow company, after reviewing the evidence packet that had been circulated, refunded charges, voided the contractor tow attempt, and canceled the HOA contract. Evelyn tried to stay on the board as an at-large member, but at the next annual meeting, she was voted out by a landslide. The new board included 2 homeowners who had been in the room during the emergency meeting and who had seen firsthand how the old system had operated. They immediately implemented a rule requiring all violation notices to include timestamps, submission records, and a clear appeals process. I ran into Evelyn one more time, about a month after everything settled. I was walking my dog past the community center and she was getting into her car. She saw me and for a second I thought she might say something, but she just stared and then got in and drove away. I did not feel triumphant. I just felt tired. The whole fight had taken months of my life, cost me money I did not have to spare, and forced me to become an expert in HOA bylaws and legal procedures that I never wanted to learn. But the fence was up, my property line was clear, and the board had learned that paperwork cuts both ways. The neighborhood felt different after that. People started asking questions at meetings. Violation notices dropped by half because the new board was actually checking the rules before issuing them. The architectural committee started posting decisions publicly so homeowners could see what was approved and what was not. I finished the backyard project that spring. The fence became the border for a small garden and a fire pit area where I could sit outside after work calls and decompress. It was exactly what I had wanted when I started the whole process, and it felt better because I had fought for it and won. The funny thing is, the timestamp on Evelyn's violation notice proved she had issued it before the committee meeting she claimed had reviewed my application. That single detail, buried in the metadata of the email, was the thing that made Richard take the case seriously. She had insisted on a deadline, and the timestamp proved she lied. When he saw that, he knew the rest of the packet was credible. It was a small technical mistake, but it unraveled everything. The HOA attorney corrected her in plain language in front of everyone, and the board was forced to act. The settlement that includes refunds and limits on enforcement became the foundation for a completely new way of operating. It was not perfect, but it was better. And the HOA lost in small claims and paid costs, even though the case never went to trial, because the filing itself was frivolous and the evidence made that clear. I kept the video of Evelyn moving the survey stake. I never had to use it in court, but I showed it to Richard during one of our calls, and he told me it was the most reckless thing he had seen a board member do in 20 years. He said if she had been caught doing that during a lawsuit, she could have faced criminal charges for evidence tampering. I backed it up on 3 drives and stored them in different locations, just in case I ever needed it again. The contractor sent me a thank you card a few weeks later. He said he appreciated that I had stood up to the HOA, and that it made him feel better about taking on projects in managed communities. He even gave me a discount on a future job as a goodwill gesture. I have not needed him yet, but I kept his number. The neighborhood is quieter now. The new board meets once a month and posts agendas in advance. Violations are rare and they are handled with warnings first. Fines only if the issue persists. The architectural committee actually reviews submissions within the 10-day window and sends written approvals or objections with specific reasons. It is not exciting, but it works. I still see some of the homeowners who were at that emergency meeting. We nod at each other in the grocery store or wave when we pass on the street. There is a shared understanding that we all survived something ridiculous and came out the other side. It is a small thing, but it matters. The fence still stands. It is straight, solid, and exactly where it belongs. Every time I walk past it, I remember the night Evelyn stood in my yard and told me my paperwork did not count. I remember the panic of thinking I might lose everything over a few wooden posts. And I remember the relief when the system finally worked the way it was supposed to. I do not talk about it much anymore. Most people do not care about HOA drama unless they are living through it themselves. But when someone moves into the neighborhood and asks me about the board, I tell them the whole story. I tell them to document everything, to read the bylaws, and to never assume that the people in charge are acting in good faith. I tell them that the rules protect them as much as they protect the HOA, but only if they know what the rules actually say. And I tell them about Evelyn, the board secretary who thought she was untouchable, who weaponized paperwork and deadlines and selective enforcement until it all came crashing down. I tell them how she walked out of that meeting and never came back. I tell them how the board replaced her with someone who actually follows the process. And I tell them that it is possible to win, even when it feels impossible, as long as you keep the receipts. The fence is still there. The garden is growing. The fire pit gets used on cool evenings when I need to clear my head. And the HOA leaves me alone, because they know I will fight back if they do not. It was worth it. Every frustrating email, every sleepless night, every dollar spent on surveys and legal advice. It was worth it, because I got to keep my home, my peace, and my dignity. And because the next person who gets targeted will have a better chance than I did. Stay safe, and I will catch you in the next one.